Good morning. It's an honor to welcome Dr. Fatih Birol for the second time. He gave us the pleasure to give a lecture here in our Global Energy Leaders series. Thank you very much. As you know, Dr. Birol is the chief economist of the International Energy Agency, but not only that, he's probably the most respected energy economist in the world, and no serious student can go without reading the World Energy Outlook. The 2011 World Energy Outlook states very important issues such as the leading role of China now, the importance of gas, and it develops three special topics, if I'm not mistaken. The reduced role of nuclear energy in the coming future, given the problem of Fukushima, the role of subsidies, and not least the problem of electricity access. In my view, it was a huge error of judgment not to have included energy access in the Millennium Development Goals, but now it's being corrected, and that's good news. Dr. Birol, it's really a pleasure to have you here. We had 700 people this year in this lecture series, so the target is next year to have more, and we would really love that you come back again for the third time. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Professor Pino, for the invitation, and good morning to all of you. In the next half an hour or so, I will try to highlight some of the key findings of the World Energy Outlook we published. It's a major effort of the people at the IE, and two of them are with me today, Mr. Olayanik and Mr. Lee and Mr. Frost. I see Julius Volker, one of our former colleagues who left the IE and went to the private sector, which is, I don't know, it's a good move or not. So we will understand very soon. So, as Professor Pino mentioned, we have a couple of, I believe, important messages, but the overall tone about the energy picture and the climate change is much more pessimistic than we have in the previous years. And I have a couple of reasons why we are more pessimistic. First of all, I want to start with those. Now, in many countries, financial crisis is the most important issue that the governments are dealing with, especially in Europe. And Mr. Minister, you know, your government is making major efforts to address the issue of budget deficit and many other countries. And the implication on the energy is twofold of this financial crisis. One, energy was at the top of the agenda of many governments only a few years ago, but now, since they are all focusing on addressing the climate change, the importance of energy and climate is sliding down in the agenda of the governments, and their attention is diverting other issues. Second, many of the solutions to address the energy and climate change problems need additional funding, new technologies, clean technologies, and so on. And the governments do not have so much funds available now, while they divert the funds to address the budget deficit issue that they are facing. So the economic concerns today do not help at all. Second, we had a tragic accident in Fukushima, and it has and it will have major implications on the energy sector, not only on the nuclear, but also competitors of nuclear power. Third, I think everybody knows, our numbers show that we expect normally bulk of the increase in the oil production globally would need to come from the key Middle East and North African countries, such as Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the others. But with the changes now, as a result of Arab Spring, in the mindset of many governments, makes us think twice whether or not this production growth will really come or not. And there are some data points which came in the year 2010, which were, to say the least, frustrating. For example, in the context of climate change, all the governments now of the world, almost all of them, think that the climate change is a serious issue. And they do many programs and many measures to tackle the climate change. However, while this interest on the government side is increasing, we have in the year 2010 the highest carbon dioxide emissions level ever in the history. So the CO2 emissions, which is the most important greenhouse gas, reached a historical high in the year 2010, and which is a big contradiction with the government view, the growing public awareness. Another point is on energy efficiency. I don't know any government in the world who doesn't have the energy efficiency as the key action item. Rich governments, poor governments, oil exporting, oil importing, all of them, as if they made cut and paste. Energy efficiency improvement is very important, blah, blah. However, when you look at the trends, normally global energy efficiency every year improves in a modest pace because of the technological innovation. And what the governments want to do, and what we as the IEA would like to see, is that this improvement in the global energy efficiency to be accelerated to address the climate change and energy security problems. However, leave aside the acceleration of the improvement, for the first time since many, many years, we have seen in the year 2009 and 2010, global energy efficiency has worsened. So the energy efficiency is not even in its normal pace of slow improvement. It has worsened 2 years in a row, which is a very bad news. And another bad news, at least I think so, that the high oil prices put a major burden on the oil importing countries' import bills. So their trade balances have negatively affected in the last 1.5 years. So this is the point of departure. We have a financial crisis, we have a major accident in terms of nuclear power, puts a lot of questions there. We have geopolitical developments in the very crucial area of oil production. And in terms of the data for efficiency and climate change, we are doing very poorly. And this is definitely not very promising point of departure. So looking a bit ahead, the next years to come, where does the global energy demand come from? Which countries are driving the global energy demand growth? If you look at the OECD countries, the so-called industrialized world, US, Europe, Japan, shown in light green here in this picture, their contribution to global energy demand is completely minimal, at the negligible level. All the growth is coming from the emerging countries, Middle East, Russia, India, but most importantly, China. A huge growth coming from China. And which means China plus India make about 50% of the growth, and it implies the following. Decisions, energy decisions, which will be made in Beijing or in New Delhi or in Moscow, will not only have implications for their own citizens, but for the entire world because of the sheer size of their economies and through trade, international trade linkages. For example, in the year 2009, China has started to import only 3% of its coal use because of a decision they shut down the inefficient coal mining. 3%. And at that time, before China started to import coal prices were about $60. And when China started to import only 3% of its coal use, coal prices jumped to $120, doubled. Again, we will see similar things on the clean energies and other fronts. The decisions which will be made in these countries will have true trade linkages or through carbon dioxide emissions for all of us. 1 ton of CO2 going to atmosphere from Shanghai or from Detroit or from Lille in France or in Duisburg in Germany, it has exactly the same effect. So therefore, it is important to see that the action is not anymore in the industrialized world, but the action is somewhere else, and that action will affect all of us. In terms of fuels, in our likely scenario, which are the fuels who are going to gain more importance? This is, as of today, all the fuels. The biggest growth comes from renewables and natural gas. For natural gas, the economics, I will say in a moment, will play a role. And for renewable energies, there is a strong government support in many countries. In terms of nuclear power, after Fukushima, some of the key countries who said they are going to increase their nuclear power plant capacity, most of them, the bulk of the countries have reconfirmed their intentions, such as China, India, Russia, and Korea. And we said in our likely scenario, they will go ahead with it, and there's a small increase in nuclear power. However, as Minister Pino mentioned, there are some second thoughts, and I will come to that in a minute. In terms of oil, two magic words: oil demand growth, transportation sector, and emerging countries. Half of the growth in oil demand is coming, global oil demand is coming only from China. Now let me show you one of the, to me, most important findings of this outlook. It is about the oil markets, but not only about oil markets, it's about the foreign policy and geopolitics. When we talk about the oil security, oil prices, oil imports, the very first country comes to our mind is, since decades, United States. United States and in the oil security, these two things have been more or less synonymous for many years, because in US, some of you know much better than me, when the oil prices or the gasoline prices come to a certain level, it has implications, even the popularity of the administrations. And we know that US keeps a good eye on the oil security within its borders, and perhaps more importantly, beyond its borders for the international oil security, because US imports huge amount of oil, and it is crucial for the US and the global economy. But when we look at the future, we see that the oil imports from US is declining substantially, a major drop, for two reasons. One, on the demand side, on the transportation sector, the current administration was able to put a lot of new efficiency policies in order to push the oil demand down, to use the cars, trucks more efficiently. So downward pressure on the demand. Second, on the production side, we see significant amount of oil production coming from the so-called light tight oil. And our numbers may be even on the conservative side here. So what does this mean? US may well lose slowly but surely interest in keeping an eye on the oil security worldwide, because it is not anymore it will not be anymore so important as it has been throughout several past decades. Whereas for Europe, where oil security is not a major issue, or perhaps not even an issue in many contexts, Europe becomes the largest oil importer around 2015. And another friend or a company comes to Europe, which is China. Huge growth in China's oil imports, and again, our numbers here may be on the lower side for China. So the landscape for the oil security, oil imports, oil trade is going to change substantially, and this is mainly as a result of the developments both on the demand and supply side in the United States, and that in Europe, we think Europe will take US around 2015 and China around 2020. Now, MENA countries, Middle East, North African countries, are crucial. They have a lot of reserves in terms of oil production, and according to our projections and the projections of many similar institutions, normally more than 90% of the growth in the global oil production would need to come from the countries I mentioned: Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Algeria, and others. It is under normal conditions. And in order to bring this oil to the markets, we expect yearly about $100 billion investment to go in order to develop the oil fields and make produce the oil and bring it to the markets. However, ladies and gentlemen, after the Arab Spring and the recent political developments, we see that there is a significant risk that the oil production and oil investments in that region will not come forth as much as one would like to see in order to meet the growth in the global oil demand and compensate the decline in the many existing fields. So we said, what happens if the investment is not 100 billion but 1/3 less because of the recent changes, and we made a deferred investment case? Why investment may be less? Because some governments, after the Arab Spring, are diverting their money from oil spending to some social spending programs. Some of the governments in the Middle East and North Africa. Again, some governments would like to increase the production much slower than they thought before, they planned before, as a result of the change in their mindset to take it easy and not to increase the production that much. So as a result of that, if we see a lower investment, which is definitely an important probability, we see that the production from that region will be much less, and as a result of that, we may see around 2015, $150 of oil prices in real terms and 175 in nominal terms, which is definitely a bad news for the consumers and even for the producers, even though in the next few years it may bring some handsome revenues to those countries, as it will give an impetus to alternative oil fields, which are normally expensive to produce, but 150 real, very high level price, it will make them profitable. And plus, will give an impetus to the in the transportation sector non-oil-based mobility systems, and they will lose market share. But we think there is a risk in the next years to come that from the MENA region we may not see growth as much as we would like to see, and this is a very important aspect of the oil security, oil markets, and oil prices in the next years. Natural gas. We have, some of you may remember, 3 years ago, we started to work on natural gas, and we have recently asked the question whether or not are we entering a golden age of gas? Are we entering a golden age of gas? And our answer is probably yes. We are entering a golden age of gas. Why not 100% yes, only probably yes? I will explain you in a minute. But why a golden age of gas? Because there's a lot of supply from everywhere. We see lots of countries are discovering, putting in production new gas supplies. United States, but China, very active country in here. Australia, 6 major projects are on their way now, the coal bed methane and shale gas, which will make Australia, we believe, in 10 years of time, the largest LNG exporter, overtaking Qatar. So many things are changing there, and diversification of the sources are very good compared to oil, not such a concentration. This is the good news. Lots of gas is coming to the markets, conventional, unconventional. On the demand side, driven by China again, once again, Professor Pino mentioned the importance of China. Once again, China is driving the global gas demand growth, and it will grow. The gas, and we have all the conditions, almost all the conditions to enter a golden age of gas. What is the problem? To be honest with you, there is one major problem, and it may block the road to golden age of gas. Namely, in many instances, we see the production and extraction of shale gas creates environmental problems. And this is not green lobbying or blogging in the internet and so on. This is a real problem in many cases, especially the water issue. Contamination of water is a real problem, and therefore we think this can be a roadblock. But the good news is, according to our analysis, this problem, which is a real one, can be solved by applying the best technologies available, which are more expensive than most of the technologies applied now, but these technologies are here, available, and they can be applied. So therefore our appeal to the governments is set the right standards, set the right regulations in a very strict way, so that the companies use the best standards available, which is a bit more expensive than their practices now. But we also say the companies, if they really want to see a golden age of gas, they have to apply golden standards to their extraction and production technologies. Otherwise, it can definitely block the road. Coal. For me, coal is a, if I may say so, is a forgotten fuel. Why forgotten? Because in the meetings like this, in Europe or in the US and elsewhere, we rarely talk about coal. We talk about the PV, we talk about wind, biotechnologies, and all of these things. But it only shows how far we are from the realities of life. And this chart I am going to show you will prove this. When we look at the last 10 years, and this is data, this is not a forecast, what has happened, the data, if you put together how much natural gas we used worldwide, put on top of that oil, put on top of that all renewables, hydropower, solar, biofuels, wind, geothermal, and all of them, and put on top of that nuclear power, this is the total of everything but coal, and this is coal alone. So it means almost half of the growth of the total energy demand in the last 10 years came only from coal, and the other half put all the other fuels put together. So 50% from coal, almost, and 50% from oil, gas, and everything put together. And yet, coal doesn't take any significant chunk in our international energy debate when we look for solutions for this, and that again shows how much we are missing the real life in some of the international discussions we have, and how the coal will develop in the next years to come, what kind of technologies we will use will be therefore crucial for the coal and for the future of climate change. Now, nuclear power, I mentioned to you that normally most of the countries who have significant nuclear power programs, China, India, Korea, Russia, they go ahead. But also, there are some countries who are debating this very, very heavily, the future of nuclear power. Some countries, such as Germany, already changed their positions, but some very nuclear countries, such as France, where I live, in France, as you all know, France's electric system is basically relying on nuclear power, and we have elections next year in France, presidential elections, and it is one of the two hottest topics in the French presidential campaign. Are we going to go with, for nuclear, or are we going to decrease the share of nuclear power? A debate that I have never heard since decades in France. Japan, another major nuclear country, and there is a strong debate in Japan about the future of nuclear power. And we said, let's see what happens if there is a major shift away from nuclear power. What are the implications of that worldwide? And we have assumed that what happens if there are no new nuclear power plants built in OECD countries, and in the emerging countries only half of it is built what they have planned. And what we see is that this gap with the declining share of nuclear will be filled by renewables, coal, and natural gas, depending on the country. And this would increase the coal demand significantly. This will increase the natural gas demand significantly, therefore putting a upward pressure on the price of coal and natural gas. Of course, renewable will also grow, but coal and natural gas will grow. And carbon dioxide emissions will get an additional boost as a result of lower nuclear future. Because if it is, a part of it will be replaced by renewables, no problem. But if it is coal, which will be the case in many Asian countries, it increases CO2 emissions. And natural gas definitely emits less than coal, but it is not completely innocent, natural gas, when it comes to CO2 emissions, unlike nuclear or renewables. And these are some global implications. When you look at on a country-by-country basis, the countries which are very much of a nuclear countries, the implications will be much more grave. So therefore, lower nuclear future means, I would say, implications for energy security, because you will have less eggs in the basket. implications for the economics of the energy prices. It will push up. And the third, implications for the CO2 emissions. And of course, it's up to governments to decide which way they will go. And I do respect the governments if they leave the nuclear power, as they have to listen to the voices of their citizens, full respect. But we wanted to show what could be the consequences of a major shift away from nuclear power. One word on renewable energies. There is nobody who doesn't like renewable energies. At least everybody says so. Everybody likes renewable energies. However, the growth in the renewable energy is very much a function of the subsidies they enjoy. But in very few cases, renewables can compete in the absence of any government support with the traditional energies. But we have to see growth in renewable energies, as it is very important for all of us to address the climate change and energy security. But I can tell you, I can give you a bad news if you're really a fan of renewable energies, because many governments now are in the process of giving a second look at the renewable energy subsidies, especially given the financial difficulties they are facing with. In Europe, it is very pronounced. Many countries who were the champions of renewable energies, they are trying to cut the subsidies, also in some Asian countries as well. And this would have major implications for the renewable energies if those subsidies were to be phased out. And we shouldn't also forget that there are also fossil fuel subsidies, which is much higher than renewable subsidies. Currently, renewable subsidies are about $66 billion, and the fossil fuel subsidies are over $400 billion US. One word about Russia. Russia is and will remain the cornerstone of the global energy system as a major producer of oil, gas, coal, uranium, electricity, and everything. So you may have this or that views about the Russian energy system, but this is a big reality, like a rock in our energy landscape. But we have seen in our analysis in the World Energy Outlook that there will be a major change. Russia and its position. Currently, Russia's economy is very much relying on the energy export revenues that Russia is enjoying. Perhaps too much, I would say. But this is the reality. And today, Russia has one major, very important client, European Union. Almost 2/3 of the money that they sell, the energy, comes from European Union, and therefore there are very lively debates between Russians and European Unions. I am sure as a minister you have experienced this with your Russian counterparts, and this is going on. However, ladies and gentlemen, this picture is changing very quickly and I would say significantly. There is a new client coming, which is called China. So Russia will have, instead of having one major single client, Russia will have two. Europe and China, two important clients. And I am sure anybody who says something, it can be energy or it can be bagels, whatever you say, it is better to have two clients rather than one client, that you can deal with it in a much clever way and the market will help you. Whereas Europe will lose its privileged position of being the most important client, as the money going from Europe to Russia is very crucial for Russian economy, and Europeans are aware of this as well. So this will change, and this will have implications, I believe, beyond energy again. And as some of the, or few of my slides show you, energy and geopolitics or foreign policy will be more and more interwoven in the next years to come. My final slides are about climate change, which is a major concern for us, because about 2/3 of the emissions which is causing the climate change is energy related. Yesterday, a new set of negotiations have started of United Nations in Durban in South Africa. Discussions are going there. And I wanted to first bring to attention one aspect about those negotiations, because as you know, the main story is between the countries why we don't have an agreement. We don't have an understanding who is responsible for what, definition of responsibilities. And developing countries led by China and others say that you don't look at the only 1 year who is emitting a lot today. You look at the historical perspective, because the carbon went to atmosphere in the last 10, 20, 50, 100 years is still there, concentrating there. And you, rich countries, US, Europe, you have been developing since 100 years and putting a lot of carbon in the atmosphere, and created this problem for us. And now you are telling us to use the more expensive energies, clean but more expensive in many cases, to clean up the situation. And this is not fair. And when you look at these numbers, the last 100 years, 110 years of emissions, they really have a point. I mean, the US and Europe were responsible for the 100 years, a big chunk of the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions. However, ladies and gentlemen, the picture is changing. When we look at the next 2 decades or so, we see that the Chinese emissions are growing so strongly that they are overtaking first EU, Europe, and coming close to United States. So the argument of cumulative emissions will not hold anymore very soon. The second argument is on the side of the, again, developing countries, and they are right to say that don't look at the emissions in terms of the gigatons, megatons, or whatever. Look at on a per capita basis. We are 1 billion people, and when you talk about, I don't know, Norway, 6-7 million people, and the others are 10 million people, we can't compare these emissions like that, which is, again, there is a fair point there. But however, even on a per capita basis, Chinese emissions are overtaking Europe around 2015, almost tomorrow. India, with all respect to my colleague Vijay here, India this year, according to our analysis, became the 3rd largest emitter after China and US, overtaking Japan and Russia, even though India's per capita emissions are much lower than China and others. What I would like to say here is that the definitely responsibility, big chunk of the responsibility is on the shoulders of the OECD countries, but even that definition of the responsibility is set to change very quickly. And without China getting on board, whatever we do, it will not change the picture. And thanks God, Chinese government is making very good steps in the right direction, ranging from the clean energy technologies to carbon pricing experiments in some of the provinces that we have not seen in many rich countries in the Western world. My final point on the climate change is about the 2 degrees Celsius trajectory target. So first of all, let me tell you that currently we are on a terrible path of temperature increase. We have been analyzing every year where we are in terms of the CO2 emissions and what will be the temperature increase it is leading to. And our analysis show that we are perfectly on track for a 6 degrees Celsius temperature increase. And I just learned from Washington Post today that the 6 degrees is equal to 11 degrees of Fahrenheit. This is because I was very much shocked in that they said in that the Washington Post that we say 11 degrees increase in the temperature increase. I said, oh my God, so this is a big scandal again. But then I saw it was Fahrenheit, so it is a bit relaxing for me, but still not. It's still a very bad news, of course. Now we are definitely on track, and this is not changing. And the world leaders in Cancun agreed to limit the temperature increase to 2 degrees trajectory, which we call the 450 ppm trajectory, which could barely help us not to have major implications in terms of flooding, in terms of droughts, in terms of the sea level rise and other things. And we wanted to see, we want to give a realistic picture, what is the situation now? What is the room of maneuver left for us? Since we have already a lot of energy-using infrastructure, power plants, which will be with us for 50, 60 years when we build the power plant, cars, refrigerators, the wash machines, which are all consuming energy, and throughout their lifetime, they are already emitting CO2 emissions. We wanted to see, this green line is the emission levels which is permitted to us, the maximum level, if we want to stay 2 degrees trajectory. And we took an X-ray of the global energy-using infrastructure, all of them, and what we have found out is that with the current power plants we have, current cars, current factories, and so on, we are, as long as they continue their lifestyle without us building anything new, already 80% of the allowed emissions will be eaten up by the existing infrastructure. Without we build any single new power plant, which are already here, will eat up the 80% of the existing infrastructure, will eat up 80% of the permissible CO2 emissions. And if we do not have a major change in our investments, especially in terms of the clean energy technologies, by 2015, 95% of the permissible emission rights or emission limits will be eaten up with the new plants, new factories built. And most tragically, if we do not have a major change in our investment trajectories, as of 2017, we use all of our CO2 emission permissible rights, and as of 2017, the door to 2 degrees will be closed forever. Or after 2017, all the power plants, all the cars, all the factories you have will be based on renewables, which is impossible, all of them. So this means that in order to see a major clean energy investment wave as of 2017, you have to have earlier either an international legally binding agreement or a carbon price or something else in order to push the investors to go for clean energy technologies as of 2017. And when I look at the international climate policy debate today worldwide, I do not see major reasons to be hopeful that we will see such a major dramatic change will happen. So I would like to finish my presentation with one final slide. This is an issue that we have been following in the World Energy Outlook since 10 years in a very stubborn way, namely energy and poor. Today, according to our analysis, 1.3 billion people, about 20% of the global population, they have no electricity. Mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they have no electricity. And we think this is an issue as important as energy security and climate change. And this is not having access to electricity, is not only not having light, it also means you cannot keep the medication of your child in the refrigerator, for example, very simple realities of life. You can't have internet access. You can't have an operation in a hospital. So there are very concrete daily life implications of that. And therefore, we think this is a major issue. And the good news is here, as a result of these efforts that we have been putting in the World Energy Outlook in Columbia University, Vijay and his colleagues, Mr. Secretary General of United Nations now took this seriously and announced that the 2012 will be for the world, energy for all. UN announced every year for something, water or women's rights or AIDS or something, and 2012 will be the energy for all, and we hope to see some good results coming from these efforts, if any. So let me finish my presentation by telling you that I tried to highlight a couple of uncertainties: economic, geopolitical, technological uncertainties. But one thing is certain: there is a big world outside of the OECD, and in that world, people want to have better lives, modern lives, which means more energy. So there will be energy demand growth. This is certain, but uncertainty is with which fuels, which technologies, and how, and at what price we are going to meet that demand growth. We see that the oil supply diversity is getting less and less, which means higher prices, especially when the global economy is back on its feet, is in front of us. As we have been saying since almost 4 years, the era of cheap oil is over, and we have to cope with this very reality. On the other hand, for natural gas, there will be some new options opening in terms of supply and in terms of demand. Coal, as I said, I don't know if it is English-wise, it's the right grammar or not, but it's a forgotten fuel. We have been forgetting coal, but it reminds us in the data, in the statistics, which always tells the truth. And this is that there is a major decalage, major difference between our discussions and what is going on in the real life. But how coal will be used in the future will be crucial for the coal's significance. We will see electricity sector investment will be more and more capital intensive, mainly as a result of growing share of renewables, as they require much more capital intensive investments, plus significant implications for transmission and distribution line investments. And as I said, we will need worldwide, many decades to come, Russia as a major energy resource power, but we hope that Russia uses its own energy much more efficiently. So many countries make steps to address the climate change, as I said, in Europe, even in China and other countries. But these steps, even though they are positive steps, when you compare with the challenge we have, they are far from being satisfactory, and therefore our message is, if we do not very soon make bold actions and binding agreements, the door to 2 degrees will be closing forever. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. I would like to start with 3 small questions. Well, regarding to oil, the increase in production after until 2035 is equivalent to Saudi Arabia's. If we take into account the depletion of existing oil fields, we are at 4 or 5 Saudi Arabias. Given the investment climate in the Middle East, 5 Saudi Arabias in 25 years, it's a hell of a lot. So I wonder if your negative scenario cannot be optimistic. That's one issue. The other issue is regarding renewable energies. Now, it's a fact that with the financial crisis, there's a lot of bad talk about renewable energies. What surprised me the most is that the cheapest renewable energy, which is onshore wind, OECD countries have almost given up. If you look to the UK, somewhat in the US, and that is a clean technology which is already competitive with other fossil fuel sources, but for whatever reason they don't like the noise, they don't like the image of wind turbines. They gave up, and now they focus on a technology which is dreadfully expensive, the offshore wind, and not technologically stable. On top of that, if, as you rightly mentioned, they are to revise subsidies, politicians forget that once they revise subsidies, they revise the institutional confidence of investors, because investors have put their money in these projects for 10, 20, 30 years, and when you revise the subsidies, then in the future they will ask for much higher rates of return. And the third issue, it's a doubt. Your figure for 2035 CO2, is it the same as last year's World Energy Outlook, or is it a bit higher? Because, you know, here, from this perspective, I was seeing on the diagonal, and I had the impression that it was a bit higher. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me first, I don't know how the colleagues here are dealing with the oil issues. Some of the colleagues are, I know, they are very familiar, but let me, even if you are not an oil analyst, and if you have nothing to do even with oil, and will not have anything to do with oil in the future, which is not a bad thing, just for a background information, let me explain you one concept. that Mr. Minister indicated. We say oil production need to grow. That's fine, no problem. But we automatically think oil production need to grow this much because oil demand need to grow coming from China and here and there, which is true but half true. In fact, if we need to increase the oil production in the next years, let's say 3 units, 1 unit is needed to meet the demand growth, and 2 units are needed in order to compensate the decline in the existing fields. Because oil fields are like human beings, and when they are young and they are very powerful, they bring a lot of oil to the markets. They come to a certain level of peak, and they started to be less powerful, and they continue to decline their production, and then they disappear. So, therefore, it is not only we do not have to increase the production in order to meet the growth in the demand, but at the same time, compensate the decline in the existing fields, most of them being in North America, in Europe, and many other countries. So this means that the importance of the MENA, Middle East, North African countries, will be much more important in the future because the reserves are there. However, we have a major problem how those reserves, if and how they are going to be developed and produced and come to the market. And we have, as I try to say, we see major challenges in front of that, which means basically high prices and volatile prices. Whether or not this is good for the alternative technologies, I would say, as French say always, it's a question yes or no. When you ask a question to the French people, they don't say yes or no, they say yes and no. So I say yes or no, that's a French answer. Why yes? Let me explain first. Because, of course, when the price of the oil goes up, automatically you see that its competitors benefit from that in terms of price. But you can, let's take United States. You can have higher oil prices or gasoline prices without having international oil prices going up. You can have like in Europe and elsewhere, the CO2 prices, you can put a price there, instead of waiting, expecting that the international oil prices go up, because you are going to give that money to the countries which are producing oil, and on top of the $100 or $110, you have to transfer VAT to those countries. And second, the world, I should say, doesn't consist of only US or Europe. Today, the countries which suffer the most under high oil prices are the oil importing developing nations. In sub-Saharan Africa, in the year 2011, this year, if the prices continue like this, about 5% of the GDP of sub-Saharan African countries will go to cover the oil import bill. It means higher than their economic growth will be eaten up by the high oil prices. So it is the no part of the benefits of the high prices. We have to think perhaps not only the penetration of the alternative technologies in the Western world, but also perhaps have a bit of a broader view of the rest of the world. Now, under wind, you are right, there is a growing interest in the offshore wind in Europe, which, according to our analysis, will not be competitive, even in Europe, in the absence of subsidies around 2030. And even if you assume a cost reduction because of the lots of push there, and in the onshore wind there are significant problems. For cost, less problems. Still, it is not competitive in many cases, but competitive in some cases. But the main problem is, as you said, the environmental acceptance. It is the noise, it is the aesthetics and others. And plus, there are some system problems because of the intermittent nature of the wind energy. CO2, our CO2 numbers are, you are right, you look at from this perspective, it look higher, but whatever perspective you look at, it will not change, it is higher this year because the starting point is much higher in the year 2010 because of the huge increase in the CO2 emissions, as I tried to say in the beginning, in the year 2010, which is very much in contradiction to the government statements, to the policies of the governments, and so on, which is definitely a bad news.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for coming to SIPA. I wanted to ask you about your opinion of the WTI as a benchmark, and if you think that the reverse in the Seaway pipeline will be enough for correcting the spreads with respect to other fuels, and also your opinion on the ASCII, the Argus Sour Crude Index, as a reliable benchmark for sour crudes in the United States.
I can take a couple of them and give all of the points.
Can we take another?
Hello, thanks for coming. I actually have two questions. First, I want to know what's your idea about the energy mix of China in your 2035 scenario? Because in the China's 5-year plan, the government intends to decrease the share of coal and oil and increase renewables and natural gas. Is it going to be the same in the 2035, or is there going to be like change in the share? And second question is, I thought that you're quite positive in the China and Russia energy cooperation, but like right now the energy talk between China and Russia in terms of natural gas has been going on for like more than 10 years and nothing has happened. So just wonder, what's your view on that? Like if it's gonna happen, when? Or what are the factors that may change this cooperation? Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks for a very interesting talk. My question is about the relationship between natural gas and renewable energy. So what's your view if there is substantial investment in the natural gas infrastructure? Will that have a negative or a positive effect on the development of the renewable energy infrastructure and production?
Hi, my question is about energy access, and it's about like where the money is coming from, and what is the role of the private sector to like to fulfill this gap.
Shall I perhaps take this and then go for another round, if needed? Now, the first question, WTI versus Brent, if it is still representative, it depends on who you are, but in our work, we pay more attention to the developments on the Brent side, as it is perhaps a bit more representative compared to WTI. There were some specific logistical reasons why we saw a couple of weeks ago almost $20 difference between WTI and Brent now currently, as a result of some of the problems are sold through Seaway and the others. It went down to today it's about $10. But still, when you look at worldwide and where the oil is consumed more, where the oil is traded more, who buys the oil, I think Brent is perhaps a bit more representative compared to WTI, even though Brent is not completely, I would say, representative for the entire world, but has a better, perhaps can give you a better indication about the oil prices, and I do not expect it very soon they will come to the level what we have been seeing, $3-4, but the direction is going towards that way, as it was $20 only a couple of weeks ago, and it's only $10 today. But I would suggest if you want to see the developments in the markets, I would pay more attention to Brent, as it is not very much affected by other external, including logistical problems. China, I mean, it is not up to me to say, give what is the optimal mix for China, but I would like to see for the Chinese people benefits to have less environmental local problems, forget the CO2 emissions, less carbon intensive picture in China, and the Chinese government is already making some steps. In fact, in the 12th five-year plan, Chinese government would like to put a cap on coal and would like to see more gas. And according to our projections, in the next 20 years, China will be the champion of the manufacturing of clean energy technologies in terms of the windmills, in terms of the solar panels, in terms of electric cars and others. But this will not be enough to transform China from one day to another, from a very carbon-intensive energy sector to a less carbon-intensive sector. But there are some steps in that direction, and I would really recognize the very good decision of the Chinese government and a very courageous decision to put CO2 prices in some provinces on experimental basis, which we have not seen in many Western countries except for Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Of course, another item for China, which we always highlight, is there is a huge scope of improvement of energy efficiency. There is a huge scope there, which will be definitely good news for China, because I show you the import bill of China, or the import needs of China for oil. This can be definitely slowed down if, for example, in the transportation sector, in the cars, trucks, if the Chinese car efficiencies were much better. In terms of the China-Russia trade, of course, it is very difficult to say it will go this way or that way. But first of all, in terms of oil, there is already a very good trade linkage there, and in terms of coal as well. And I would expect that given the developments in the natural gas markets, it is our estimation around or before 2020, we see that there will be a pipeline between China and Russia. Well, it will be a win-win, especially with the Russia developing the resources on the western Siberia. In terms of excess, where will the money come from? I think the money need to come from three different sources, and according to us, to bring electricity to everybody in the world, we need yearly about 45 billion US dollars, which is, in fact, I can tell you, which is only 3% of the global energy investment, which is peanuts. But it will need to come from three sources. One, it needs to come from the domestic, the host government. Second, it should be a private sector, and third, it should be the multilateral organizations. And we think the private sector would need to play more of a role, as it was the case in many other countries. But there is also a big role for the host governments as well, to use the money what they have in a much more transparent and effective manner.